Alright guys, so today I made around $5,000 day trading this super simple strategy. Now this is probably my favorite setup I actually like to take. It's the most common setup that appears on a day-to-day basis, and for me it has around a 70% win rate with a pretty low risk involved. So in this video I want to show you guys exactly how this setup works, what I call it, and overall just show you guys a trade recap from the trade I took today using this exact setup. So with that being said, let's dive straight into the trade recap. Now keep in mind, I do trade with prop firm accounts, so I trade with 20 different accounts. So this number is actually multiplied by 20. That's how much I actually made. Comes out to around $5,000. Now I traded the S&P 500 or ES on this, and as you can see, this is my entry point. I trimmed here, trimmed here, trimmed here, and I believe I trimmed the rest up here towards this resistance area. So the setup I took for this trade is what I call a value pullback. Okay, so as you know, you usually want to trade with the trend, right? You want to trade with the trend of the market. You hear the saying, the trend is your friend. And one of my favorite strategies is when you're trading with the trend, wait for a pullback and then you get long, and then you can keep on going up with that trend. Now, the hard part is knowing how far it's going to pull back. So what I do is I use multiple different confirmations to see how far the price is actually going to pull back. In this case, we're going to more of the mid value range on that pullback with the trend. Okay, and I'll show you exactly what that means in a second. So in order for me to take this setup, I have to see all kinds of confirmations in order for me to actually enter the position and follow this setup. So anyways, the first thing I'm looking for when it comes to a value pullback, and I'll show you the chart in a second, is this, right? So the first thing is the trend, right? Because again, we want to trade with the trend for the setup. That's what the setup is for, is the pullback of the trend. So first off, we just got to make sure the trend is moving in a direction and we're not in a choppy period of the market. So the first thing that I personally like to look for this is like my first checklist, is I want to see the VWAP and moving average moving up together, or this setup can work the same way on the flip side. So if you're looking for shorts, you'd be looking for them to move down together. Okay, in this case, I went long on this trade, so they're moving up. Okay, as you can see, I was trading ES. Now, how do we actually determine what the trend is? Well, a very simple way that I like to use is I want to see the moving average, which is this blue line right here. So I use a 200 length moving average and also the VWAP. So as you can see, pretty much all day, the moving average and VWAP have been moving in a direction together, right? They're both moving in the upwards direction together. So this is the first sign that I could actually take this setup. Now, if we go back here, the next thing I'm looking for, once I kind of check that off my box, is I'm looking for an actual level. Okay, so keep in mind, just because the trend is up and I see some reversal candles, I'm not going to just go long on the trade. I want us to pull back to an actual level. So in this case, my trade I actually took was the low of day support area. Now, there's actually multiple entries you could have gotten for this trade, but the one I entered at, as you can see, was 8:54 my time. So I'm 2 hours behind Eastern time. So if we go to this chart, I took this trade on this candle right here. Okay, so this is 10:54 Eastern time. Now, basically the way I got this was because, as you can see, this is pretty much our low a day support, right? So if we just draw a line straight across here from, basically where our low was, this is our last support area. We bounce off it here, we bounce off it here, we also bounce off it here, and here as well. Now, once I saw the trend was up by seeing the moving average and VWAP moving up in a direction together, and I also saw we're coming down to our support level, the next thing I want to actually look at and, basically check off my box in order to take this trade is I need some kind of level confirmations, right? I don't want to solely just rely on this level, especially because this level already had a couple different touches, so I knew is a little bit more likely to get broken, right? The more touches the level has, the weaker it usually becomes. So if we go back on here, my level confirmations was the VWAP and the moving average. And this is why I call this setup a value pullback, because VWAP usually represents the value, right? The fair value price based on the volume. So for this particular setup, what I need is for our support level to match up with the VWAP and or the moving average. In this case, it lined up with the VWAP and moving average pretty much perfectly. Again, this is where I entered on this candle right here. So that was my level confirmation for this trade, basically a confirmation that my level will actually work and act as support again. So anyways, going back to here, I need one more confirmation to actually enter the position, right? To actually press the buy button. And what this confirmation is, I call these entry confirmations, okay? So now this is actually giving me confirmation to enter my position. So what I'm looking for typically here is a 1 or 2 minute reversal candle with elevated volume, okay? If I can see elevated volume and reversal candle, it tells me that big buyers just stepped in, right? Because of that elevated volume and because of the structure of the candle. Okay, so what I'm looking for is I wanna see elevated volume when we dip into the support area, because this basically tells me that buyers are stepping in, right? They have a lot of orders on this area still, maybe from this move or this move. So we can see the first time we tested this level again was on this sell-off. Now, the reason why I didn't take this trade was because by the time this trade closed, it was way up here, is at 916. And I would have had to risk around 4 points on this trade, and the reward just wasn't that big. But anyways, as you can see on this candlestick, we had pretty elevated volume, right? Compared to all the rest of the volume, this volume is pretty elevated. And what you'll also see is we had all this selling, right? Look how much selling we had. And notice how the volume was just as high on this buy candle. So this tells me that the buyers were bigger on this particular candle. Now, again, I did not get in here. What I did was I waited for the retest. And as you can see, we came back down again and we came back into this level. And I want to see how this candle would actually hold, right? If we had hold above this candle. So I actually ended up entering right here at 1054, right when we touched that moving average. And you can see on this candle where I actually entered, we didn't really have any elevated volume. So you might be wondering, well, Chad, why did you enter this trade? Well, keep in mind, when we have double bottoms, kind of like we did here, what I can do is I can use the first bottom as my volume confirmation, okay? So that's kind of how I treat this, is as long as the volume is there on that first bottom, then that second bottom, I'm just trying to get a good entry. I don't really care about the volume as much. Sure, if it did have elevated volume, that would be an extra confirmation, but I don't need it in order to take the trade, okay? So that's kind of how I think of it, just because if we had a bunch of volume here, that means there still should be orders on this level once we retest it again, which we did. So as you can see, I basically entered right here, right at 913. As you can see, I entered at 49.13 at 854, which is 1054 on this chart. And I always put my stop loss a few points below the lows. I just went to this candle, okay, because this is the candle that had all the volume. So I'm basing my trade off of this. And I'll put my stop loss, you know, a few points below it. So the low of this candle was at 912. So I basically had my stop loss at 911. Okay, so I had it right at 911. We got pretty close to it, but again, these orders were still on here and buyers were able to buy it up. And then I started trimming along the way as we touched this resistance level and eventually this resistance level up here where we almost hit new highs. So as you can see, going back to this, we are trimmed right here at 914. Then we trimmed again at 917, again at 920 almost, and then once again at 923. So that's basically how this value pullback setup works. Again, it's one of the most common setups that will happen on a day-to-day basis because usually we have some kind of trend, but we end up pulling back at some point throughout the day, right? We end up pulling back significantly sometime throughout the day. And this is when it ended up actually happening, and I was able to spot that setup in real time. Now, if we look on here, I also want to show you guys the other things that I want to look at after my trade is done. Okay, so the next thing to finish this trade recap is how much was I risking, right? So I was risking 2 points on this trade. Like I said, usually with this setup, you can get a very low risk entry because we're looking at those reversal candles and that elevated volume. We're able to put our stop just a few points below the wick of the candle that had that elevated volume. Now, if we look at the reward for this trade, right, the reason why I wanted to take this after I saw all these confirmations was because the risk reward was very well. Okay, so as you can see, my first trim was when I was up 2 points. So basically I just trimmed this right when we got a push above the EMA. That's where I was able to take my first trim. I think it was near this little resistance right here actually. Then my next trim was 5 points. I think I had another trim at like 7 points and then 10 points. So anyways, if you calculate the risk reward on this trade based on my risk and the average amounts of points that I actually made on this, my risk reward was around a 2.83. So again, I usually aim for a 2.0 risk reward. So overall, I was happy with this trade. I was happy where I actually trimmed because it gave me that nice risk reward over 2.0, which is what I like to aim for in all my trades. So anyways, guys, this is the value pullback setup. Hopefully this trade recap was helpful for you guys. Real quick before you go, if you guys want to trade with me and you guys want to see my exact levels on the S&P 500 and NASDAQ every single day, be sure to join our free Discord community. Inside of here, I share my levels every single day on the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ market. I also show my trade recaps every day in here as well. And we also have a community of all kinds of other members you can talk to. So if you guys are interested in joining this community, like I said, it's completely free and open to the public, and we'd love to have you join us inside. If you do want to join, all you have to do is go to the first link in the description below, or just head over to this link right here. That being said, guys, as always, I hope this video was helpful. Be sure to subscribe if you're new. And with that being said, I will see you guys in my next video with another day trading lesson.